Alright, so for 9.4, our learning target says that we will be able to graph and transform quadratic functions. The quadratic function, or the quadratic parent function, is f of x equals x squared. The graph of all other quadratic functions are transformations of that. So for the parent function, f of x equals x squared, our axis of symmetry is going to be x equals 0. Our vertex is going to be 0, 0, and our zeros, there's only one 0, and that is at 0. So now we're going to compare the coefficients in graphs of the following functions. Okay, so f of x on our graph is labeled green, so I'm going to write the coefficients in green. So using that standard form, so f of x equals 1 x squared plus 0 x plus 0. Our g of x graph is blue, so I will write it in blue. So g of x equals 1/2 x squared plus 0x plus 0. And our h of x graph is in red. So h of x equals negative 3x squared plus 0x plus 0. All right. So what are we noticing might be the same and different? Well, the same are our b values. So b is equal to 0 and c is equal to 0. So our b values and our c values. Also, what is the same is the vertex. If we're looking at our graph, is 0, 0, and our axis of symmetry is 0. X equals 0. Okay. What is different about these graphs is our a values and our widths of the parabolas. So right away, that's telling me that the a value is what's affecting the width of this these parabolas. Okay. So width of parabolas. Oh. Come on. All right, width of parabolas. So the graph of f of x equals ax squared is narrower than the graph of f of x equals x squared if absolute value of a is greater than 1. And the graph of f of x equals ax squared is wider than the graph of f of x equals x squared if absolute value of a is less than 1. So we're going to practice by ordering the functions from narrowest graph to widest graph. Okay, so I'm just going to write down the absolute values for my a's here. So my a here is negative 2. My absolute value of negative 2 equals 2, and that is greater than 1. So I know this graph is going to be narrow. Narrower than my parent function. For g of x here, my absolute value 1/3 is 1/3, and that is smaller than 1, so I know this is going to be a wider graph. And for h of x equals 4x squared, well, absolute value of 4 is 4, which is greater than 1. So this one's going to be a narrower graph. Okay, so right away, I know since this one in the middle, g of x, is going to be wider than the parent function, I'm going to stick that right here at the end. So g of x is the one that's going last. So now I just have to decide whether f of x or h of x are narrower, or which one's more narrow. So I'm going to look at my absolute values here. I have 2 and 4. Well, 4 is a greater absolute value. So I'm going to say that is narrower than f of x, which means f of x falls right in the middle here. Oops. Okay. So now we're going to look at vertical translations. So vertical translations of f of x equals x squared plus c. So if c is greater than 0, then the graph, where am I at? Then it will be translated c units up. Okay? If the graph, or if c is less than 0, then the graph f of x equals x squared is translated c units down. Okay, so it all depends on if it's greater than or less than 0. So now we're going to compare the graph of the following functions with the graph of f of x equals x squared. So g of x equals negative 1/3 x squared plus 2. So we're going to compare their width first, since we learned about widths. So we're going to look at our a value here. So our absolute value of a is 1/3, and that is, a is less than, less than 1, not 0, less than 1. So since it is less than 1, our graph is going to be wider. So wider than the parent function. And now we're going to look at our c value to see if it's translated up or down. So our c value is 2. So c equals 2, and c is greater than 0. So when c is greater than 0, that means it's translated that many units up. So wider than f of x equals x squared, and translated up 2 units. Okay, so for h of x, let's try this again. So the absolute value of 2 equals 2, and 2 is greater than 1. So since it's greater than, it's going to be narrower than f of x equals x squared. Now we're going to look at our c value. So c equals negative 3, and that is, c is less than 0. So it's going to be translated down three units. All right. And that brings us to the end of that video.